The La Crosse Public Library Archives presents Dark La Crosse Stories, a series in collaboration with the La Crosse Tribune, featuring the seedier side of La Crosse, Wisconsin's history. These true stories are reflections of their time and place in history. The intent is not to diminish the human suffering that may have resulted from these events, but to bring light to ways in which people in the past experienced life. The city of La Crosse and the locations where these stories took place occupy part of a vast network of the ancestral lands of the Ho-Chunk, and we thank our Ho-Chunk community members and their ancestors for their stewardship of this area's land and history.
The Roaring Twenties. The name of that decade was given in hindsight to reference great societal changes in the United States after World War I. It calls to mind jazz music, flapper dresses, and illicit booze. But as people were living through it, this time of Prohibition had no end, and something that up until January 17, 1920 had been a personal liberty for most was now criminalized. A dry spell had settled on the nation entire, and not everyone was on board. In Wisconsin, a state already known for its beer culture, things were a little more humid. For over 100 years prior to 1920, La Crosse's Ho-Chunk population, along with all indigenous tribes in the United States, had been under alcohol prohibition by the federal government through a different series of laws. Now the 18th Amendment extended similar control over the entire U.S. population. In La Crosse, where 5 breweries employed many first and second generation European immigrants, it was not just a loss of personal liberties, but of livelihood. Many of the breweries had to shut their doors, despite the allowance of brewing beer with a much lower percentage of alcohol. The G. Heilemann Brewing Company continued to operate by brewing near beer, as well as producing and selling malt syrup. Many citizens stayed honest. There's a story about the Wendling Brothers Grocery, which dumped barrels of whiskey as soon as enforcement of the law went into effect. Whiskey that probably would have earned them a pretty penny later. Recollections of life during this era are full of memories of the availability of illicit home-brewed beer. The county sheriff and the federal agents soon had their hands full keeping up with the larger-scale operations that popped up throughout the city, and were not always able to go after individuals wanting the customary beer with dinner. Speakeasies, often operating under the guise of soft drink parlors or in cafes or restaurants, soon flourished. Bellying up to the bar and ordering an orange soda might get you something a little cloudier and definitely with a lot more kick to it. While most of these offenders paid a fine and gave up their try at bootlegging for good, some persisted, especially if there was money to be made. Take Frank Kratzer, for instance. He was managing Bohemian Hall, a social hall for La Crosse's Czech immigrants, when the 18th Amendment went into effect.
The hall was a place where folks in this community could go after a long day at work to relax. They could get a beer, maybe have a conversation in their native tongue. We would host dances and union meetings. We had a history of serving beers from local breweries, beer that many of these men had a hand in producing. No one was causing trouble or having too much. I didn't see why we should stop. It was easy enough to make homebrew. Even though most of the breweries closed, you could still get near beer from Heilemann's. It wasn't as potent as it used to be, so you just put in a little yeast and sugar, maybe some of that malt syrup that Heilemann sells. Wait a few weeks, and it's as good as gold. We call that working over the beer. I wasn't doing anything that anyone else wasn't doing at home. It's just that the hall was making a little money from that the feds didn't like. Well, they busted me, and I ended up serving some time at the Milwaukee House of Corrections. Not all of it, though. I was pardoned by the president himself, Warren G. Harding, just in time for the holidays. Rumor has it the White House is overflowing with confiscated liquor. Not too long after that, I got a job managing another establishment, Centennial Hall, and, well, what can I say? The people want what they want.
At least 20 half barrels of beer were found in a cave in Ebner's Coulee in November of 1923. The cave, which had been used in the past for cooling beer by the Heilemann Brewery, was being rented by Frank to store kegs that were being worked over. He paid a fine of $350 while the beer was dumped into the Mississippi River.
That was a loss, but I would not be deterred. The next year, Centennial Hall was busted when I served some agents by mistake. This time, I had a good lawyer who argued that just because I was the one behind the bar shouldn't mean that I was the one who broke the law. Now, that argument may not have been the best idea because it was my brother-in-law whose name was on the hall license. I calmed down a little after that. I'm an old-timer now and could probably settle down. That doesn't mean the family name stayed out of the papers. My son, who was also named Frank, moved down to Watertown and got into a little trouble over a hijacked truck full of moonshine. And there may have been one more little dust-up that one of us was involved in down at the old Dorfinger warehouse, but I'll let you decide which one of us it was.
Some went out of their way to accommodate large-scale production in their home.
I lived next door to Fred Wampler for a few years over by the Heilman Brewery. He was a house painter and paper hanger by trade. He wasn't your typical La Crosse resident for the times. Fred was born in Texas and kind of wandered up here with the work. He was a boxer too, and I guess he decided to also give bootlegging a try. His house on the corner of 4th and Mississippi is old, probably there since the 1860s. Still needed water to be pumped from a well and had an outhouse too. Lots of older homes were tapping into the city's water main, and though the previous owner had the house hooked up, it must not have been up to Fred's standards. He soon had another plumber out there digging and installing a pipe from the house to the water main on the 4th Street side instead of the Mississippi Street side. Now, I should also tell you that the house didn't used to have a basement, just a root cellar really. Well, Fred was really ambitious, and making moonshine in a tea kettle just wasn't going to cut it. So what does he do? Gets his hands on a real still. I mean a big one. It could hold hundreds of gallons of mash. Well, now where do you think he's gonna put it? I'll tell you where. Fred goes and puts a real cellar under his house. I'm talking 14, 15 feet deep. Big enough for that still. And all the plumbing work? Well, let's just say you need a lot of water and water pressure. I'm not sure how long Fred was able to keep this going, and I won't say who was buying the product, but when he did get busted, those federal agents were gobsmacked. They had never seen a still that big and sophisticated around here before. I think they said they took about 200 gallons of moonshine whiskey out of that little house. Fred went ahead and pled guilty and paid a fine. Almost $200. It was either that or serve 2 months in county jail. Mrs. Wampler still lives there with her 2 sons, but I haven't seen Fred around in quite a while. As for the moonshine, well, it turns out that Fred wasn't the only one trying to make some money. Later that year, Sheriff Ristow was accused of taking that moonshine, plus some other bootlegging stuff, selling it and splitting the profit with his undersheriff and a couple of janitors.
These operations probably provided some extra spending money for those running them, but the soft drink proprietors in town had more of a demand. Some had Chicago connections, but even those weren't reliable. There's a story about Walt Nigley, who later ran Walt's restaurant, ordering and paying for some illicit moonshine under the code crockery on the bill. He got a shock when his shipment arrived. Cases of actual crockery. A local group decided to cut out the middleman and have a go at distilling their own. Within a block of where today the La Crosse Distilling Company operates, a shadier predecessor once stood in 1928. The William Dorflinger Company had a downtown warehouse they no longer needed on State Street between Front and 2nd Streets. Just prior to the events of this story, the department store had sold the warehouse on land contract to a company called Palmer Ventilation. It's unclear where this company originated from, either Milwaukee or Chicago, depending on who is telling the story. Not too long after that, employees of the Funk Candy Company, today the Charmant Hotel, began to complain of odd smells nearby.
At first, it was barely detectable. In this part of the city, it usually smells like chocolate. But here and there, you would catch a strong smell of acetone or a wet animal. I had already worked for Mr. Funk for almost 20 years at this time and was used to the subtleties of the candy operations. Many of my coworkers also smelled it, which made me nervous because if they noticed it, well, any wandering informant or agent would too. I had to let my brother know. I'm Grace Kratzer. You already know my brother, Frank. His family had really gotten into some trouble with all of this Prohibition business, and I didn't want it to get worse. It's unclear how my brother was involved. I just knew that he had made some friends that were doing much more than working over near beer. One of them had some serious connections in Chicago and had decided to make a name for himself here in La Crosse. Jack was his name, Jack Sheets. He was the one who bought the warehouse. I think he believed it was a primo spot for his bootlegging operation. He probably thought the aroma of the candy company would help mask the smell of distilling whiskey, and the rail spur next to the building was another incentive. Well, It all went south that summer.
Setting up an operation downtown was quite a bold move, and it had its advantages. The Chicago, Milwaukee, and St. Paul Railroad, which terminated at the depot across the street, had a spur that ran next to the warehouse. Shipments of corn sugar used to make the mash would be unloaded from the rail car right into the only door to the warehouse. Soon customers at local speakeasies like the Silver Grill Cafe and the Star were enjoying what was being called La Crosse County Bourbon. The operation was said to produce 4,000 to 6,000 gallons per week. Then, according to La Crosse Police Department logbooks, late on the night of June 18, 1928, 2 long-distance calls, one to Chicago and one to St. Paul, were made by federal agents. They were going to need some backup. The agents had discovered the origin of the strange odor downtown and caught laborer John Fuchs in the act.
I was running late to start my shift at the warehouse about 7 o'clock that evening. So when I finally unlocked the padlock on the door, Elmer, one of the other guys working on this, was right there waiting for me. He had already changed back into his own clothes. We keep a set of pants and rubber boots in the warehouse so as not to raise any suspicions. The corn mash can get pretty potent. He grabbed the key from me, scolded me for being late, closed the door, and locked me in. I headed down the basement and changed into the mash-crusted pants and boots. A finished shipment of what people around here like to call La Crosse County Bourbon had just gone out on the train during Elmer's shift, with a few cases set aside for local delivery. I set to work tending to the large vats of fermenting mash and keeping the smokeless boiler going by adding shovelfuls of coal. I was expecting someone to come by later that night to start delivering the rest of the finished product, so when I heard footsteps upstairs making their way to the basement steps, I wasn't concerned. The big guys have keys to the padlocks, of course. However, I got quite a shock when I came face to face with 2 federal agents and their guns. They arrested me, but I wasn't talking. I answered the questions about the still, but that was it. I wasn't about to rat anyone out. I spent the night in lockup, and my bail was set at $5,000. I don't have that kind of money, but let's just say that my silence was appreciated by my bosses, and I was bailed out by that next afternoon.
The agents had found one of the largest operations in La Crosse County. A still with 6 vats capable of holding approximately 4,000 gallons was at work in the basement of the 3.5-story building. 3 distilling columns climbed through the basement ceiling, past the first floor, with a 4th column in construction. The whole operation was estimated to be worth $50,000 at the time, nearly $1 million in today's dollars. When other agents arrived from St. Paul a few days later, they set to work destroying the still. Axes swung at anything copper-colored, such as coils and columns. 20,000 gallons of fermenting molasses and sugar were drained from the large vats, while rivulets of the last of the La Crosse County bourbon found its way to a nearby drain. The warehouse was locked up and could not be touched for a year.
It took those agents 4 months to round everybody up. In December, the 7 of them headed to court in Madison. They all ended up pleading guilty. Most of them, including Frank, got a few months in the House of Corrections in Milwaukee. John Fuchs, the man caught in the act by federal agents, only ended up getting 2 months there. Jack Sheets, who, I will only say, probably knew the most about the operation, was sentenced to 14 months at the Leavenworth Federal Penitentiary. A steep sentence, but I heard he got out on good behavior. I always thought Prohibition was rather unfair, and many others did too. By 1933, we had a new president who supported repealing the 18th Amendment. Some of the people that found themselves on the other side of the law just a few years earlier turned their experiences into new business ventures and became upstanding citizens. Take Jack, for example. Later on, he was elected president of the La Crosse County Tavern League. And since cocktails became popular during Prohibition, in order to subdue the kick of the moonshine, and with women starting to go to bars more and more, Jack saw an opportunity. In 1934, only 5 years after he was convicted of bootlegging, Jack Sheets opened a cocktail lounge that you've probably heard of, or maybe even visited. The Cavalier.
The following conversation between Sarah Ludington, Associate Librarian at the La Crosse Public Library Archives, and Mitch Parr, Master Distiller at La Crosse Distilling Company, was produced by Tyler Eike and Deanne Tovar of Fox 2548 Productions.
So this is La Crosse Distilling Company. For an organic facility, what you're kind of not seeing is that we will mill and kind of grind up the raw materials, whether it's rye, wheat, corn, wherever that may be, behind this wall, and then it will get sucked through the wall and pushed into this mash tun. So this mash tun is about 800 gallons, and it's steam jacking on the bottom, and then geothermal jacking on the sides. So we'll put everything in there, mix with some enzymes, and bring it to different heating points and start to convert those complex sugars into simple sugars that yeast can eat and turn into alcohol. They'll cool it down, use that geothermal to about room temperature, push it into one of these 3 fermenters over here, and let it ferment to about 10% alcohol over about 3 days, at which then we'll go into distillation. 2 of the fermenters, 800 gallons. This bigger one is about 2,300. So after that alcohol kind of production, we will go into distillation. The still is about 400 gallon combination still. So it will essentially be able to kind of adapt. For me, a batch is about 600 gallons. So we'll take stuff from the fermenters, do a stripping run where we're just bringing it to a boil and trying to separate the grain from the liquid. After we do that about 4 times, we'll have about 350 gallons of low wines. So taking from 10% alcohol to about 35% alcohol. And then we'll put it back in the pot, bring it to a boil again, and then we'll do a refinery run. The still is kind of built this way so that you can kind of adjust what you want the final product to be. If I want to do something like brandy or bourbon, I can run it through the humid again and just have it kind of round out the flavors and then bypass the columns. If I want to clean it up a little more, I can have it come down from the cross and then start to come up through a series of 8 plates. The plates you can kind of see are moving liquid. It's not so much like a dinner plate, but it's more like a hollow maze. So it goes up this little tiny volcano. And then the vapor is trying to maintain that then there's a little hat on top that's kind of trying to make it condense. So it goes through this daisy chaining of impact that is trying to make it recondense and fall back down, while vapors that can maintain vapor state of energy rise higher. And then they're more pure in alcohol and a higher alcohol content. The oils return to the pot, start their life again, while the alcohols rise up and are able to go into condensation and collection.
Okay. Is there significance to the number of columns? So you have, is it 2 for this?
Yeah, so there's 8 plates in each one of these columns, and then the big gap at the top is a condenser where it's a little deflag. So it allows you to push in cold water to force the vapor back into a condensate and force it back down the column. So essentially making it repurify even further. The more plates you have, the more alcohol content you should get with each plate. But the deflag allows you to actually almost kind of like take a plate and push it back down and make it go through the system even more. So there's a little manipulation both ways. Once it gets to the top of the second column or wherever it's at, there's geothermal water run up kind of a cross tube and recondenses it into a liquid, and it comes out the other side.
Can you talk a little bit about the smaller one back there?
For gin, we put everything into a still behind this one. So this one's 400 gallons. The still behind it is about 75. And it's essentially kind of the same system. Instead of 8 plates after the helmet, it's 4 plates. And then instead of a second column, it's a basket. So it's got a perforated bottom to put botanicals instead of plates. So for gin, instead of everything tasting a little bit like gin when we make it, that allows us to kind of keep this one doing the workhorse of production. And then if we want to divert some of the vodka base, we can put over there. It's just botanicals and run it like that.
So after hearing the story that we just heard, how difficult would it have been to hide an operation like the one that was in the former Doflinger's warehouse?
Structurally, I think, being they're using liquid ingredients that would all dissolve, the molasses, the sugar. They don't have to worry about spent grain. They don't have to worry about milling it. That actually really creates a lot of convenience. And then all the waste byproduct that what they have remaining after they distill could go right down the drain. So that aspect of it, not that hard. And then what I kind of think of is the fumes of 4,000 gallons of self-fermenting, that's a lot of CO2. It's a lot of just poisonous gas. And so then I kind of think about how it's owned by a ventilation company in Milwaukee. So maybe they know how to divert that gas to a healthy standpoint. So I mean, really at that point, it's more about the fuel getting to the basement, the coal and that kind of stuff, and then the finished goods getting out. Okay. That'd be the hardest part.
Yeah, which they covered with the rail car.
Whatever shenanigans, yeah.
So you mentioned the odors. Let's say that even if they were ventilated, they would still be pretty strong, right?
It would be pretty strong. It would be very similar to city brewing today.
Okay.
That kind of hydrogen sulfide, a little farty, a little eggy. It'd be that same kind of like noxious stuff. So even if they were ventilating it out, I don't think it'd probably smell like the chocolate factory next door. It might be recognizable. Like I can't imagine what it smelled like back then. But it would be noticeable.
Okay.
Yeah.
And do you have to worry about that at all here? Everything's kind of taken care of?
No, I have, the government regulates me to a lot of safety precautions. So I have to flip the air in here like every 3 minutes. So I have to sweep all the gas out of here no matter what.
Since the operation only went on for about 8 months, what do you think the quality of the product would have been like?
I don't think the quality could have been that bad. Really, if it's like 3 stills at 6 tanks, kind of sounds like they were almost like double distilling it, where it could come off a little bit like vodka, or maybe a really good moonshine. Well, it doesn't sound like they're aging very long, but couldn't be the worst quality. The city water around this area, like the aquifers and all the minerality, the manganese and kind of things that yeast need for actually converting that stuff. Mm-hmm. There's a reason we have big alcohol production in the city, and so they had all the makings to make a good product, and it sounds like they had the columns, everything else to kind of purify it, whatever impurities they had.
So only 7 people were ever prosecuted in that case. How labor intensive would it have been to maintain a production of that size? Do you think anybody else could have been involved that wasn't?
The nice thing about fermentation is like the bug is doing the work for you. Mm-hmm. You just set it, forget it, let it just roll its course. So really, once you set it in motion, if they had a big vat that was like pitch yeast and get it going, just babysit that it's not, flooded the whole basement. It does a lot of the work for you. Like yeast is a great employee, and the still would be the most concerning part. Like if there was gas, flammable, fuels in the building and something that could actually explode, that'd be my biggest kind of concern babysitting it. But sounds like you're just shoveling coal like you were on the Titanic.
About how long today does it take to make a quality product? You start
for us, we'll ferment for about 3 days. We'll do a kind of low wine run, just separating the solids and liquids. They would quite do the same, but more just kind of concentrating the alcohol. For us, we can do start to finish, putting alcohol into a barrel 5 days.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's pretty quick.